Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. North Carolina, it's part of Carolina. You know, Carolina, pecan pie, all that lovely shady trees and southern bells. Well, it happens to be a very important state politically in this country. Stacey?
We have been in North Carolina quite a lot over the last few weeks, and many times we find ourselves in the midst of a big political campaign because Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are spending an inordinate amount of time down there because North Carolina is a crucial swing state. Their 15 electoral votes are very crucial, and it's considered a purple state. It voted for Barack Obama in 2008, it went for Mitt Romney in 2012. However, we were in Pittsburgh area, which went for Obama both in 2008 and 2012. So it's a very Democratic region. We spoke to the four-time mayor of Pittsburgh, Randy Voller, and this is what he had to say about why North Carolina is so important.
Four-time mayor, Pittsburgh, North Carolina. Pittsburgh, as you were explaining, it's at the crossroads in North Carolina. You get the north-south and east-west highways. This is ground zero for North Carolina, isn't it?
This is ground zero. We're exactly the middle of the state.
Okay, now explain what North Carolina, the importance it plays in these elections.
Well, as they've been looking at what's been happening over the last 6 elections, you notice that some states are essentially becoming blue states and some are becoming red states. North Carolina has only gone once for a Democrat, 2008 for Barack Obama, but we're a purple state. We have 15 electoral votes. If you take our 15 votes and you put them in the blue team side, it's pretty much impossible for a Republican to win.
Right, so this is it a battleground state, right?
It's a battleground state. It was a battleground state in 2012, and we were the closest plurality between Barack Obama and Romney. Romney barely won North Carolina in 2012, and of course, President Obama beat McCain in 2008. And in this election, if this goes for Hillary, she's the president.
And you've got interesting demographics here because half the population is now from other states that have moved here, like my mom, for example.
Exactly. We've got over 10 million people. It's a fast-growing state, and about roughly 5 million of them are from someplace else.
Let me just skip back for a second. What did you advise Debbie Wasserman Schultz about this state?
Well, I advised the DNC, and of course we hosted Debbie a few years ago when I was chairman of the North Carolina Democratic Party, and I said, look, if you make investments in North Carolina, you can stop the Republicans cold. Because essentially, if you win North Carolina as a Democrat, it doesn't matter what happens in Florida, it doesn't matter what happens in Ohio or Pennsylvania. Because those 15 votes come onto our column and they go away from the Republican column.
Right, so I get what you're saying. Yeah, so much attention, though, is played on states like Florida, et cetera. So you're saying is that, but if a Republican can get the North Carolina on their side, it's like they don't have to go to Pennsylvania, Florida.
You mean a Democrat?
Yeah, Democrat.
Well, they do, but I mean, what I'm pointing out is that it's kind of a fail-safe, essentially, because this is a true southern state. I mean, in Florida, you have to go north to go south. It's been a state that's been transient with a lot of new population. In this state, if you break them here, the Republicans are going to have to change their ideological bent, and you're not going to see this extreme GOP anymore.
Now, Hillary is quite to the right of Obama, but you say that Bernie will actually have some say in how she ends up governing.
I believe so. I believe because of what happened with the platform, I was a delegate for Bernie Sanders in Philadelphia, and with the way the platform was reconciled between Hillary and Bernie, you're going to see a huge group of people that are going to be advocating for progressive policies, and so I believe that she's going to have to govern to the center left.
Yeah, Randy Voller is a hidden gem in all of this. You know, he's a guy who's been there, four-term mayor, and he really knows everybody, and in a very key state. And he also has some fantastic information about other aspects of vote and vote rigging, which we can get into at some point.
We are going to get into it a few episodes down the road because we are going to roll out a few little clips over the next few episodes of our interviews with Randy Voller down there. Now, I might add that Pittsburgh, there's only 6,000 voters on the register, and they went for Obama in both 2008 and 2012. While we were walking around in the town with him, we saw about 7 Trump signs, yard signs, and 2 Hillary signs, one of them handmade. But for Hillary, here's the headline regarding her positioning in terms of North Carolina. Boosting black voter turnout is key to Clinton campaign's North Carolina strategy. The problem for Clinton in North Carolina, where polls continue to show a close race with Donald Trump, is not opposition. By all accounts, she will win overwhelmingly among those blacks who do vote. It's the risk of apathy. So we did see a lot of apathy. In fact, after the third and final debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, we were in one of the local cafes where we were known and regulars. I asked about 6 or 7 people, and I asked 7. So 4 women, 3 men. Every single one, when I asked them what they thought of the debates, their response was a form of, I don't like Hillary. Now, one of the guys said he's going to vote for her, but he does not like her.
Not only do we have an interesting period of transition politically, you also have, technologically speaking, a transition period. And we talk about we don't see many signs on the sidewalk, we don't see many bumper stickers, because so much of the activism is now online. People don't use bumper stickers as a medium to express their political views. And you have a generational divide with the millennials are very active on social networking. But you have in the poor communities, which tend to be of color, they do not have access to technology. They're not online. So that's another way that you see the gerrymandering, if you will, done electronically, and that's adding another dimension to all this.
We saw more Bernie bumper stickers than we saw Hillary. In fact, we saw 0 Hillary bumper stickers. We saw more Obama bumper stickers than
But to your point, that these 7 people said they do not like Hillary.
Yeah,
I mean, the anti-Hillary sentiment is strong, but Hillary's ability to get out the vote in her favor using technology, the relationship with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg and Sharon Sandberg, the way that they're able to master the mechanics of modern voting is key.
Here's another clip with Randy Voller, former mayor of Pittsburgh. You bring up Obamacare because in North Carolina, which was one of the most successful states in getting people to sign up for the so-called Affordable Care Act, well, they've just lost all of their insurance options but one, and that is Blue Cross Blue Shield. Premiums are up 25%. You ask him about this.
All right, Mayor, let's talk Obamacare. Here in North Carolina, only Blue Cross Blue Shield is left of the major providers. The other ones have dropped out. It sounds like a freaking disaster.
Well, it's what happens when you have a Frankenstein bill and you have essentially a Republican General Assembly and a Republican governor who didn't want it to work.
Yeah, okay, so only provider offering ACA policies across all 100 counties, 24.3% increase. That follows a 34% increase. Those are big now. That's inflation, isn't it?
Oh, that's gouging.
Yeah.
But of course, part of the problem is, again, by not, offering a full exchange, by not fully integrating into the federal program, they're essentially doing a half a loaf knowing that it's going to fail, and then they're going to point to it. I mean, that's essentially what Republicans have been doing here for a long time. They don't support good public policy, and then when it fails, they say, oh, government doesn't work, we have to privatize. And that's been part of their game. It's, Naomi Klein talked about the shock doctrine. I mean, you want it to fail, it fails.
Yeah, sure enough. And so the problem in this whole healthcare issue seems to be, right from the beginning, it was thrown over to Wall Street and just said, here, let's turn it into a market. The stocks in healthcare immediately went up dramatically, and the eventuality was obvious what was going to happen. The prices are just going to go up, and it's going to be less competitive.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's, again, why I've always been a supporter of the public option.
Yeah, you would think more people would have gone with that. I mean, there's a big Bernie contingency here, or no?
Bernie battled Hillary in the state, and yes, there is a big Bernie contingency. He won some of the counties in the state, especially out west. If it wasn't for the African-American vote, who out of loyalty was behind Hillary, she might have lost the primary.
That's interesting, because the African-American vote, you would think, would go away from the Clintons, because their policies under Bill Clinton were quite disenfranchising of the African-American community. Biggest wealth collapse probably since the Civil War, and yet they still have allegiance to Bill. Why is that? Because he was the first black president, according to some?
It's very funny you put it that way, but I do think it has to do with long-term brand identity and allegiance. So I have some close African-American friends that said, look, it's like Coca-Cola or Pepsi. They knew who she was. They knew who the Clintons were. They were willing to forgive her, even though Michelle Alexander and a lot of folks had written some very good pieces on why the Clintons were problematic. Mm-hmm. But you have to look at who votes in these primaries. And young people typically don't turn out and vote.
Now, here is Donald Trump and how he is presented himself. to North Carolina. This is about Trump voters in North Carolina. The headline reads, most North Carolina Trump voters won't believe in a Clinton victory. This is from August. And he's saying, according to a new poll of North Carolina voters by the firm Public Policy Polling, a whopping 69% of Trump voters think that if Hillary Clinton wins the election, it will be because the election was rigged. Compare that with just 16% who say it would be because she got more votes. So with that, everybody has been mocking relentlessly, of course, Trump for saying that. Joe Biden says this disqualifies him from even running for president, that he believes the vote is rigged. But I do want to note that, this county where we're in, the 4th congressional district, it's had basically, it's like 11-term Democratic congressman there. This is the county. This is gerrymandering. This is called rigging.
That's vote rigging, yeah. Gerrymandering is vote rigging.
So everybody's mocking, like, America doesn't rig elections.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Randy Voller has some information about rigging elections, and we'll get into that in a future episode. But also, here's Hillsborough, even down to the town level. This is a town where the RNC headquarters were firebombed and the Nazi slogans. There's like a big hole in the middle of the town.
Yeah, no, gerrymandering is vote rigging. Making voter registration and making that available or not available, that's vote rigging. There's innumerable ways to rig votes without getting into the actual mechanics of a Diebold machine and whether or not you can hack it in and change the vote. That's just another layer on top. But let's talk about healthcare for a second, because everyone was aghast at single-payer healthcare. That, you don't want just like Medicare for all. That would be like communism. So instead, we're morphing into no competition and a single buyer healthcare, like it's a Soviet Union of healthcare. You're just going to have one health, Blue Cross Blue Shield will only exist in this state anyway, in North Carolina, and there is no competition.
And where do you go? You go to the online marketplace to buy from one seller.
From one seller.
You can't even call it a marketplace.
Right, that's like going
anymore.
into the Soviet Union, going into the supermarket, and you see one turkey for sale and 1,000 people trying to get that turkey. This is what American healthcare is morphing into. The worst of the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, Russia is, transforming itself into something that replicates America in the 1950s.
Actually, since you bring that up in the last few seconds here, I want to say this is quite remarkable too. Here are all the headlines of the newspapers in America. All Putin, Putin, Putin. And that has been the #1 topic in all of the debates.
Right, and that looks like the Soviet Union circa 1960, 1970, where it's just like America, 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 the great evil foe, and we must fight them, and we don't care if our economy goes to the garbage pail. We're going to fight those evil, Russians. Meanwhile,
Americans.
The U.S. economy in the meanwhile is shrinking. It's becoming dysfunctional. The healthcare system collapsing.
That was like the number 30 topic at the debates. It was like the economy. So with that, I think you should throw to the second half because, the economics of the program and time, space.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to author and journalist Tim Shorrock, who grew up in Japan and Korea, knows a lot of stuff. Tim, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
Glad
to be here.
Great to meet you.
Thank you.
Hillary Clinton boasted in one of her speeches, the text of which was leaked by WikiLeaks, that it was the U.S. that brought democracy to Korea. She said this as a way to suggest that a similarly long occupation can do same for the Middle East. What are your thoughts here?
Well, this kind of classic American imperial thinking about Korea, that we brought them democracy. Actually, we supported dictatorships there for many years after the Korean War, where we did intervene to help South Korea at the time. But after that, we gave lots of military support and political support to successive dictators, including one, Park Chung-hee, who was in power for 18 years, who was finally assassinated about 30 years ago or so. But during that time, it was the Korean people that fought for democracy against the wishes and the might of the South Korean dictatorship, military rulers, and they really brought it themselves. The U.S., at a crucial time in 1980, when there was an actual uprising against the military, basically sided with the Korean military against the people in the streets of Gwangju, the city in the south, where hundreds were killed, fighting, standing up for democracy. And the U.S. gave de facto support to this government and helped keep them in power at a very crucial time.
All right, now your new piece in The Nation magazine discusses Hillary's very hawkish position in general, but also specifically relating to North Korea. How will North Korea situation look under a President Hillary Clinton, Tim?
I don't think it'll look that much different than it is today, although her advisors, as I report in this piece, are talking about, we're not going to take preemptive strikes off the table and this kind of thing. They're talking about a much more militaristic approach to North Korea, rejecting the idea of negotiations unless North Korea first gives up all its nuclear weapons, which is simply not going to happen. I noticed yesterday James Clapper, the head of U.S. intelligence, said something like, basically they're giving up on trying to do anything about using sanctions to change North Korea policy. In my view, it's going to be a more, as I said, more militaristic, more warlike approach. And I think we're going to see some confrontation ahead, not only with North Korea, but with China, too.
North Korea has nukes,
Yes, they have 5.
They seem to kind of don't get a lot of coverage. And as such, or they're not perceived as much of a threat, or why is that?
Well, actually, I think they get quite a lot of attention here. I mean, I think they're seen as, there's some American officials that say they have the capacity to send a missile to the United States, which they don't, but they're moving, swiftly to miniaturize. They want to put nuclear weapons on missiles, and they're testing their missiles.
But here you have a dictator. He's got a huge gulag of millions of folks. The human rights abuses are enormous. It's a complete wasteland. But the focus of the current administration and the incoming administration seems to be on other countries, like Russia, example, being an existential threat. But North Korea, you've got a crazed dictator with nukes. Isn't that an actual existential threat?
Well, I wouldn't call him crazy. I think the North Koreans follow a pretty rational policy, actually. I don't think they're crazy at all. I think it's a mistake to see them as crazy because then you can kind of write off what they're doing. I mean, they have this policy called Songun, which is, it says military first. And they have this line that is called Byungjin line. That's like, you develop your military and nuclear capability at the same time your economy, and they see them as integral to each other. And they're going to keep doing it. And they see a big threat from the United States, and they feel their existence is at stake. And so they need to have nuclear weapons to defend themselves against the United States. And I think until that is dealt with, there's going to be tension and problem between the U.S. and North Korea.
Now, Donald Trump argues that South Korea and Japan should get their own nukes. Hillary bristled at the suggestion. What's going on here? Should South Korea and Japan have their own deterrent?
Well, Donald Trump has had this very cavalier attitude about nuclear proliferation. I think it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, maybe, Japan and not South Korea getting nuclear weapons is not the answer. I mean, a nuclear arms race in the East Asia region is not the answer to what's going on now. He's also sort of said, let them fight it out for themselves and things like that. I think, Korea went through a terrible, terrible war. There was 4 million Koreans killed. North Korea was pulverized, was scorched by the U.S. Air Force. 2 years of bombing, there was nothing left to bomb. North Koreans remember that. So, we have to look at the whole of Korean history, not just the last couple of years.
Again, just getting to the perception anyway of North Korea, certainly in popular culture and what we get on the news in terms of the breathless central broadcast of the state broadcaster and the weeping and the crying at functions and folks. I understand it's not necessarily in anyone's interest to refer to them as crazy. Okay, but the perception, however, is that they are it's trapped in a time warp. Is that fair to say?
In a sense, yes. What they've done is they've borrowed from all kinds of things. They've borrowed from, communism, Stalinism, type communism, and they borrowed a little bit from, Christianity, frankly. They have this sort of, this worship of the grandfather of Kim Jong-un, this kind of worship, turning their leaders into semi-deities. And they use kind of language that, I think reflects, some Christianity influence. There used to be a lot of Christians in North Korea, actually. There's many missionaries were there during the Korean, when it was colonized.
What would you say is the most misunderstood aspect of North Korean politics or culture?
That they're crazy.
What am I missing though? What in other words, me and other people would have that false impression or have that cavalier impression. So what do we miss? What am I missing here? What's there that's really percolating that is going to be the foundation of something going forward?
It's not a completely backward country. That's the issue. It's not a completely backward country. The people there are not all starving now. I mean, there was a very serious, famine, and that was a few years ago. The economy suffered greatly when they lost the Soviet Union as an ally, and they lost cheap oil, and there's a whole downward trend since then. But, they had until the early 80s, they had a fairly developed economy. In fact, in the late 70s, there was a CIA study that said North Korea was ahead in most indices in their economy, steel, machinery, ahead of South Korea. South Korea, of course, since then has soared past them. But it's not like a completely backward country. They have, fairly developed, industries that are not doing well in the last few years. But they have a high-tech industry. They have computers. They have everything we consider part of a high-tech world, they're developing that. And, look, you don't build nuclear weapons as a backward country. You can't build missiles if you're backwards. I mean, these are sophisticated missiles.
And they have a pretty good relationship with China.
Yeah, they've always had. I mean, China intervened in the war in 1950, came in by the millions to the shock of the United States to stop the United States from occupying all of Korea, and they pushed them back. They pushed the U.S. and UN forces back to basically the same border. And so, since then they've had close ties, but that doesn't mean China can order them around like a lot of our leaders seem to think.
Right, okay. Now, Hillary vows to continue Obama's Asia pivot, as it's called, but with more, toughness. Can she surround and contain China? This is kind of addresses this whole Asia pivot thing. Can she surround and contain China without a Philippines on board? You see what's happening in the Philippines, and without China noticing or responding. A couple of questions there.
Sure, she can. I mean, for one thing, the Asia pivot was largely her policy when she was Secretary of State. And she was actually one of the first officials to write about it and to put it into words, Asia pivot. And so, it's her policy, and she's directly connected to it. And the Philippines, it's unclear whether they actually are going to kick out all the bases. But I mean, look, the U.S. has tremendous military force in Japan and South Korea, as well as Australia and other places, Guam. I mean, the U.S. is a Pacific power, militarily, no doubt.
So people can put this into context. The Asia pivot is pivoting from what to Asia? What are they pivoting from?
Basically pivoting from the Middle East, pivoting from Europe. I mean, I heard somebody, former high-level Pentagon guy, speak the other day. He's talking about what a historic thing it is for us to be, focusing on Asia as opposed to Europe. He was saying it's the first time in 300 years, we've done this. I mean, the U.S. is not quite 300 years old, but I mean, his point was well taken, I think. And so they see Asia as the future. And that's why they're putting all this military force.
How big a spanner in the works is the situation in the Philippines now with the leader openly courting a relationship with China? The U.S. has some pretty forward military bases in Philippines, in that region. It's always been a vassal state almost of the U.S. So
they actually don't have major bases. Well, I think that they had an agreement to bring some of them back, but the biggest bases were closed years ago. The Philippine people voted and kicked them out, basically. But I mean, the U.S. Special Forces have been.
So when the current leader says he wants to get rid of all the last soldier in the Philippines,
the last U.S. military, he's talking about mostly the U.S. Special Forces that are in the Mindanao area in the southern part of the Philippines, fighting this Islamic movement that's been there for a long time.
But is this representing, put in the context of this Asia pivot, if Philippines are not really on board, how much of a problem is that, if any?
I don't think it's a problem at all for the United States military, for what I said. They have so many forces. I mean, they have the 7th Fleet in Yokosuka, Japan. They have, forward marine bases in Okinawa. They have, huge numbers of ground forces and sophisticated intelligence forces in South Korea. So, not having the Philippines is not that big of a deal, especially when you have Guam, where all these strategic, U.S. B-2s or other weaponry is based.
Well, it almost seems like a bit of a revolt. I mean, you mentioned U.S. imperialism at the top of the interview, and the U.S. has military bases all over the world.
Yes.
It treats countries all over the world as their, military vestiges. But if one country starts to revolt, in the U.S., they can't allow that to happen. Just like the mafia, if you can't let one guy revolt against the mafia, So I mean, the Philippines could be a problem.
I don't think it's going to be that big of a problem. I mean, this leader is he's a little bit like Trump.
But the U.S. typically, when they have a problem, they send someone out to whack the guy. I mean, whether it's
they've done that, but
South America, Central America, they go kill him. John Perkins' book, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. They don't like dissension.
That's not going to happen in the Philippines. I mean, the Philippine people are, kind of sick of being, part of this structure for years and years. And, I just don't see that happening.
Oh, we got to cut her off there. Can you stay for another segment?
Yes.
All right. That's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Tim Shorrock. If you want to reach us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.